Welcome back to another podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this episode, I wanted to share another kind of success story, but more importantly, talk about some of the struggles he went through when he finally did get his first developer position. So, Patrick, you've been on the podcast before. Welcome back. How have you been?
I've been well. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited to talk about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had you on the Lambda podcast episode. When did you graduate Lambda?
I graduated Lambda at the end of August. I think it was August 29th of 2020.
August 29th. Okay. And when did you get the full-time position you have now?
I was hired at the beginning of April, and then I started like the 19th, I believe, of April. So 8 months or so, about 8 months.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, yeah, let's just jump right in. I kind of want to get a feel for, the ups and the downs of the job search, right? So can you kind of take us through a journey with what it was like starting like right after you graduated, and we'll kind of just progress from there?
Sure. So starting the job search after graduation was kind of brutal. I mean, you finish the boot camp, right? And Lambda School was really good about, having everybody finish up and kind of getting you prepared. So I had a resume, I had my LinkedIn tailored, but it was just a matter of getting the applications done. But it was for me at least a little bit disorienting because all of a sudden I didn't have school, 2 days a week. I didn't have projects to work on that were monitored or I could get feedback on. It was just kind of sink or swim, just figure it out. And so I spent a lot of time pumping out applications, it almost seemed like I was throwing things out into the void and trying my best, but it's hard because it's you're used to that guidance and everything, but there's so much stuff that you need to be doing to be seen and to be heard as a developer. I mean, the leak code problems, the interviewing, the live interviewing, the projects, all of the above kind of thing. And it's hard to keep on track with all of that. So I had to be really disciplined with how I broke up my time. I made all kinds of learning plans to say, this is what I'm going to do today. Here's my goals for the month, things like that. And I put out a lot of applications before I heard anything back. And maybe that was just timing, heading into the fall and the winter when hiring slows down, and with COVID, it ended up being a long time. I mean, I was pumping out applications 10, 12 a day for a long time and just not getting really any traction. And then after the first of the year, it was almost like a switch flipped. And within the first 2 weeks of this year of 2021, I had probably 6 or 8 points of contact within the first 2 weeks. It was like an unthawing almost. And so by points of contact, I mean either phone screenings with representatives from companies or with recruiters, technical interviews or behavioral interviews. I mean, it really started to open up. And that was when I got a lot of my reps out of the way and kind of got comfortable falling down a little bit, getting some feedback, figuring out what I could be doing better or what went wrong. And, really working on my elevator pitch and just kind of getting my, my pitch deck together, how much sell myself. And eventually I ended up getting a contract position through Lambda School. They have a way for potential employers to reach out to Lambda School students. And I got an email out of the blue saying, hey, we saw your profile through Lambda School and we'd like to interview you. So I did the take-home project that they sent me, and not long after, I was hired on a contract basis, and that lasted about 6 weeks or so. And then I also applied for this job through Lambda School. I interviewed at a place called Nexient, and that was where I ultimately got my full-time job. So they made me an offer at the beginning of April of this year, and I started mid-April, and I've been there for about 4 months, and I absolutely love it.
Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations on the new position. That's always exciting. I get a question. So when you took the contract, as you described it, it was It seemed like a very, very temporary thing. Did you use an ISA to get into land based school?
Yes.
Did that trigger when you took the contract position?
No, because for me, the ISA had a qualifying income of $5,000 a month. It's $50,000 a year. So whatever that breaks down to monthly, like 41 something. So the contract was never going to be enough to trigger the repayment. So I got lucky in that regard. So yeah, no problems there.
Okay. All right. I was just curious. Well, so let's, I guess I have a few questions from when you started. You had mentioned that you were applying to a lot of positions before you even heard back. Do you have a number in mind before you got your first response?
Oh, it was, I don't know, in the 200s maybe. I mean, I applied for a lot of jobs. I mean, anything that said JavaScript, I was like, I'm applying. Like, let them tell me no. Because a lot of the times what I found is people, whoever posted jobs, they either don't label it as entry level, or it's something, maybe it defaults to entry level jobs or something, or whatever. But if it said JavaScript, or I thought looking at the job description that I could do the job, I applied. Like, I didn't care if it says senior or whatever. It was like, I'm in. So it was a lot. It was probably 200 jobs or more before getting anything back.
What was the first response that you got back?
The first response, there was a company, I think it was called Dr. Squatch. They make like a bespoke like soap, like high-end soap for men, and it's in, I think, Santa Monica or so, somewhere out here. And so they sent me a test for like a JavaScript assessment, and I didn't do great. Like, I didn't bomb it entirely, but I knew looking at it afterwards, like, didn't go well. And I had actually applied this again to what I was saying. I applied for like a mid-level developer thing, because that's what they sent me. And then the gentleman reached out to me, said, hey, we also have a junior developer role. Would you be interested in that? And then I said yes, and I never heard anything back from him. So, but that was my first response, was that assessment. And so that was like my first like involvement, that was my first like live technical assessment.
Yeah, that's when you went into that assessment, were you confident? Were you nervous? Like, what was it like?
Oh, I was nervous. I was so nervous. It's one of those things where you think you know what you're doing until you have to do it in front of somebody, and then that's where all the errors take place. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, yeah, this is easy. I know JavaScript. I've only been doing this for 2 years in school, and part-time and full-time and projects and stuff. And then it said, hey, build do something that spits out a string of HTML tags. And I was just like, what? I forgot everything, just brain drain.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes. At least it did for me. Okay, so you got your first response, and like you said, you kind of learned from that as you started getting those responses and probably facing the challenges. You were able to, like, once you get that first live interview, it's like it's really easy to be nervous during that interview, but you almost, like, for me, I guess I should speak for myself, I almost put that interview on this like really, really scary pedestal with like fire-breathing dragons surrounding it. Like, it was this obscure thing that just scared me. I'm like, I don't know what to expect, right? And at least when you get that first technical challenge, you're like, okay, kind of bombed this, didn't get the position, but I can do this, right? I know what to study now, and I know what to really reinforce with my knowledge. So once you get that first response, that's great. You had mentioned that you were really structured, disciplined in your day-to-day. You had like daily goals, weekly goals. That's awesome. What did your day-to-day look like in trying to learn, like continue to build your skills and find a job?
Sure. So I had essentially 3 things that I was trying to do. So as much as I hated it, and I avoided it as long as possible, the leak code problems, I said, I'm going to do 2 leak code problems a day. And I tried to get them done early in the morning because I hated them. And I knew it was going to take a long time, and I wanted to do them while my willpower and discipline was at its highest. Like, as soon as I got up, I'm like, I'm doing these leak code problems, knock them out. And then I wanted to do a little bit of tutorial work. So try to reinforce some skills that I was didn't cover or covered too quickly in school. Sometimes it would be little experiments, like let me set up a code pen or a code sandbox that did, explained async await, or let me figure out how to work with the HTML canvas element and like draw shapes and stuff, little things like that. Or it could be, let me learn material UI, right? And then I spent a little bit of time doing project work because I wanted to be pushing code every single day, because I thought that was super valuable. And just the habit of being able to do something and contribute, no matter how small, every day it became like a discipline for me. And then on top of that, I was doing the 10 to 12 applications.
Okay. 10 to 12 applications per week?
Per day.
Okay.
I was putting out a lot of applications.
Did you submit a cover letter?
No. Well, some. So a lot of them was just spray and pray, just LinkedIn apply, Indeed apply. There were some, if I was on WeWork remotely, I might submit a cover letter. I tried to cherry pick some jobs that I really wanted, and those are the ones I did the cover letter for. But by and large, it didn't seem like it helped me. So I'm sure they're valuable. If I was applying for a job a year from now or 2 years from now as like a mid-level engineer, I might submit a cover letter, but it didn't help me too much. At least in my experience, like I said, during my application process, nobody ever mentioned anything I ever wrote in a submitted cover letter. So it's hard to say, but I didn't do it that much.
Okay. All right. So basically, companies you really cared about, you put more effort into getting in. I guess we'll talk about your position a little bit later towards the end of the podcast. So you were submitting a lot of resumes. You were doing this every day. It took you 8 months to find a position. Did you keep this up throughout the whole 8 months?
I kept applying for jobs almost every day. I tried to do, my goal was always 10. So in most days I would hit that. A lot of times I didn't. A lot of times it was, there's nothing available. I've already applied to all of these jobs. So the goal was always 10. It varied depending on what was available at the time. The parameters of my search, sometimes I was looking mostly in California where I'm located, but I also started to look at cities like, maybe I'll move to Denver. Maybe I'll, would want to live in Chicago or whatever. So I started to expand my search a little bit to other cities, and that helped me generate some additional opportunities. But it wasn't just pedal to the metal for 8 months. No, there was some lull in that, some downtime, the holidays, so things come up, but I was pretty disciplined, all things considered.
Okay. I mean, good for you. That's not an easy thing to do for a lot of people. So you had mentioned that you had worked on little challenges. Did you work on any large, complex projects during those 8 months?
Yes. So something that I believe is that it's important for bootcamp grads, and maybe I mentioned this in the last podcast, but I think it's important for bootcamp grads to have a big project that's not done from school, just for personal learning, to kind of build an experiment with and build off of. So I started working on a project that I wanted to have implement real-time chat and video and stuff. And so I was working with Socket.io and different things to try to put together things that would differentiate me in the job market, that I could point to and go, yeah, great. I took all of the things that I learned in Lambda school, and that was my foundation. That set the floor. But I'm also doing all of this interesting, work on things that, I'm interested in, that are more, that are valuable, but they're also more common things that you see in an application, right? Modern applications have, 10 things that everybody takes for granted that they don't teach you in boot camps. Nobody tells you how to write a notification system in, the boot camp, but at least I haven't seen it. I mean, you interview people all the time, maybe it's coming up, but I don't know how that works. So it was let me go look and how to hold the server to see for changes and, different things like that. So I wanted to put together something that had a little bit of those features so that you could see I'm building towards something greater, and I'm expanding on the skills that I have in a meaningful way, in a controlled way. And it becomes kind of fun after a while, because once you have, kind of the foundation of the project in place, it becomes a lot of fun to just go, okay, I'm going to add this particular feature. I'm going to add a blog feature, right? And so it becomes a lot of fun when you can just add on to an existing project and kind of watch it grow. And so I did have one big project, yes.
Okay. Do you feel like it was a major talking point in your interview with your current company?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I could, like I said, I could point people to it. I could say, this is what I did. Here are the challenges that I ran into. And there were challenges. I mean, there were times where I would spend 6 hours trying to figure out something that turned out to be relatively small. And you're making progress, but at the same time, it feels like all you're doing is messing up. Like, I'm rewriting the whole thing because I feel like I coded myself into a corner, or I did stuff that worked in the time, but I didn't know that it was wrong or not the best way to do things. And so it's like, oh, I could fix that. And you only get to that point by messing it up and then looking at it through experience and coming back and going, oh, that's not right. And so it's a constantly in flux, but it does make continuing to work on that does make my current job easier, because it's you're just looking back on what you did, how things work. You have examples of how to do a certain subset of things that translates in unexpected ways to my current job. So it's helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So what was your most frustrating experience, gripe with the job search? Probably a couple of things. The big one is not hearing anything back, especially, and not even on the initial application stage. It's whenever somebody reached out and said, hey, we want to talk to you. And I'm like, great, that's perfect. Let's set up a date. And I would set up a date and they wouldn't show up. I just got ghosted. Like, wait a minute. And these were some were bigger companies, some were startups on angel lists, but a lot of times that was a big deal. I had people that I've interviewed with and they said, great, we're going to follow up with you for next steps. Never heard back. Or I had people give me a challenge that I spent a week on. They never followed up. And then when I emailed them, said, hey, what happened? Nothing. It was just gone. It was almost like you would think I made it up. I still have projects on my computer for stuff I spent a week on, and it went nowhere. And the other big thing that really frustrated me was people who accepted me for an interview without really reading my resume. And then what happened is I would get into the video call and I would start talking about my experience, and they would go, they would stop me and go, wait a minute, you don't have 3 years of experience? I go, no, I'm just graduated a bootcamp. Like, it's on my resume. Did you read my resume? And then they would go, I'm sorry, we're a startup. We got to nail this hire. Like, we can't hire someone without less than 2 years experience or 3 years, whatever. And they would ditch the video call. And that happened to me at least 3 times. Wow. I'm like, why'd you even interview? Like, that's a carelessness on their part too. Like, don't interview me, or if you're going to do that, like, give me the opportunity to prove you wrong. They assume that I don't have 3 years. That doesn't mean I don't have skills. So those were the two most frustrating things that happened to me during the whole search. Yeah. Wow. I'd be really frustrated. With most of the jobs that you did find, were you using some sort of job board? You mentioned LinkedIn, or were you just finding tons of job posting sites and just scattering your resume?
I did a handful of things that really worked. LinkedIn was a big one. I know at Lambda School, sometimes they tell people not to apply with the LinkedIn Easy Apply because it's lazy or because it's not monitored by a person or whatever. I was shotgunning applications. I had a number of interviews through that. So I don't know that I didn't follow that, obviously. LinkedIn was a big one. Indeed, not so much. Angel List was really helpful for me. A lot of startups, smaller companies. I got a handful of good interviews through there. I wanted to work remote, at least, or at least have the possibility to. So We Work Remotely was a great one for me. And Another big one that I used was Y Combinator's work at a startup.com. All of the YC companies that are looking for people, post there. There's a huge like market for jobs. And so that was a good one. And then the last thing that I did was just straight like Google queries. And so I would just type like, software developer, and then just do like the little site : and then put jobs.lever.com or co or whatever it is, or greenhouse.io, because those applications were really easy to fill out and you could just autocomplete them. And so I'd have my resume on my desktop and just drag and drop, and I could kick out a whole bunch of resumes, but it surfaced a lot of jobs that were remote, that were easy to apply for and that I was qualified for, that I wasn't generating through traditional search. And so that was towards the end, that helped me quite a bit in terms of getting out a large number of quality applications.
Okay. Where do you think you found... Well, first of all, that's interesting to hear about the LinkedIn Easy Apply, that you actually got responses from that. Because that's one thing I agree with Lambda. Apply directly in the site, and I also had a bad experience. Well, not bad experience. I just got no replies from it. So it's interesting hearing you did have some success with it. But what I'm also interested in is, where did you find those jobs, those interviews that didn't even read your resume, where it was like the bad types of interviews? Where did you find those?
There were a couple from AngelList, and at least one from LinkedIn that I can remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, AngelList is tricky. It's kind of a hit or a miss, and you could find a gold mine, but a lot of it is equity. It's you're
some random guy like, yep. Like, hey, work for free, but I'll give you half the company. I'm like, half of nothing is nothing. Like, I don't like, I need to be paid. And like, equity is a good thing if you're in the position where you can afford that, or exactly. If I could take a chance, I'm like, no, I need to be paid, like that, period.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you had those standards that you set for yourself, which is awesome, because there are some people that don't, and they will take, free stuff just to get that experience. And sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but kept pushing forward. You finally got your position. So let's talk about your first position. What was the interview process like? And don't go into like any specific details to expose like specific technical challenges, but we'll talk around that.
Okay, so you do it for the full-time role, not for the contract.
Correct.
Okay,
full-time role.
So for Nexian, there was a three-step process if you count the phone screen. So I heard from the recruiter and said, hey, we want to jump on the phone with you. And so I went, set up the phone call, and it was really brief, actually. And he was real flattered with all the Lambda School students. I guess Nexian has hired a decent amount of Lambda School students. And so it was kind of like, hey, I know what Lambda School does. I know what you're about. Like, I get it. We'd love to move you on. And so it was not long to get into the pipeline, so to speak. It was just, are you interested in React? What do you know about this? Would you be interested in like a possible like Node backend position? Absolutely. And so I got into the pipeline, and then there were two main interviews. There was the technical challenge, and then there was the behavioral interview. And for me, those were scheduled the following week, but they were Monday, Wednesday, so they weren't too far apart. And the technical interview, I was dreading, because I've had bad technical interviews. I've had okay technical interviews, but you just never know. And so I got into there, and I was a little bit relieved where it was a lot of discussion focus. I mean, there were some coding parts to it, but a lot of it was to assess the breadth of your knowledge. So it was, if I go to google.com, what happens on the back end? You go, okay, well, it sends the request to the DNS server and it gets resolved. And, they want to test your networking knowledge. They want to test your problem solving abilities, both in actual coding challenges, but also talking through how you would approach a problem, or, very small scale system design questions. I get the feeling that they probably had a range to how they were going to ask questions to try to figure out where in their engineering hierarchy you would fall, so they could bring you in as a developer one, or a senior developer level, something like that, so they could kind of gauge your knowledge. And that was the broad strokes of the technical interview. And then the behavioral interview was like all your behavioral interviews. I mean, it was just talking about different challenges or how you work with teams. It was refreshing because they asked you how you like to work in a team, what kind of people you like to be working with, and how you want to be managed. Because Nexient is like fully Scrum, like 100%. And so they run all of their teams in a very, like, just that Scrum way, where it's 2-week sprint cycles and all the ceremonies and everything. So they want to make sure that you're going to be okay with that. And they want to ask, different personality questions so they can assess culture fit. So that was kind of neat as well. And that was basically it. I mean, I went from initial phone screening to offer in hand in about 3 weeks. It was quick, which is nice. Because there's jobs I still haven't heard back from that I interviewed for. So.
Me too. That's really cool. What do you think was like the primary thing that you did to really catch their attention?
So, at least in the technical part of it, I think it was asking smart follow-up questions and showing that if I didn't know something, to admit that I didn't know something, and to say, well, I don't have direct experience doing this, but not failing to answer the question. So I would say, well, I don't have any direct experience with X, Y, or Z, but if I did, here's how I would approach it. And you can still, just because you've never done something doesn't mean you can't suggest a potential solution. And so you can still say, well, I've never actually had to deal with that situation, but here's how I would handle it. And you can, as long as you can think clearly, you can demonstrate that you have, like, your thought process is right, and they can see and assess how you make decisions. That goes a long way. And I spoke with my manager after the fact, because both of those interviews were recorded. And I thought it's one of those things that was a throwaway thing, like, oh, we're just recording for quality assurance, almost like they would only look at it if something went wrong. But I found out after the fact that my direct supervisor, my team lead, actually did watch all of my interview. And he goes, you're here today because I saw your interview and I really liked the way you think. I liked the way that you approach the problems, and whatever it was that I said or did, he could see potential. He could say, this is somebody that I think is a team player that I want to have working for me, and I think that would add value in a very real and direct way. He goes, and you nailed your interview, and that's why you're here, is because I really liked what I saw. And so that was kind of neat to hear after the fact, because during the interview, and this is what was surprising to me, but everybody was very, very kind, which sounds silly, but interviews are supposed to be like stoic and not really, tip their hand, so to speak. But on a number of occasions, both during the technical interview and the behavioral, the interview actually stopped, and I got feedback, and they were different people, but I got feedback like, man, you're really killing this, like, you're doing a really good job. And you never know in the moment if they're just saying that, if they tell it to everybody. And then in the behavioral one, it was, they asked some questions about, I'm trying to remember it escapes me, but they asked questions, and then I gave an answer, and they go, wow, you sure you haven't done this before? And so, you get that kind of feedback, which is nice in the moment, and it helps, I guess, keep calm, which is what I thought that they were doing, was just helping keep you kind of even keeled, so you don't kind of lose it halfway through the interview. But it turns out there was at least some truth to that, at least in my case. So that was kind of refreshing.
I like that. I really like that. Sounds like it went really well. Obviously, you got hired. And I really liked, your philosophy with, if you don't know something, like you said, admit it. That's okay. But also try to answer it. Attempt. Like a lot of these problems that you're going to be facing as a developer, it's like a lot of developers come up with problems that they don't really understand, but it's okay to try to understand it. Like, you might not have had a computer next to you to be able to do research or something like that, but you even showing that you're willing to try based on your limited experience to answer this is awesome. They want that kind of attitude. They want a problem solver. And you'd be surprised, but sometimes you really have, people take a long time to develop that skill too. And you showed it in the interview. Yeah. So, I mean, that was good. Okay. So I think I got a good feel of what your job process was like, or job search process. And your interview process. And again, congrats on the new position. That's always exciting.
Thank you. It's such a relief. Once you get the first one, it's like it validates all the work that I've done that people have done in the best way. Like, it's just like, this was all worth it. And then you get in sometimes, when you buy something expensive and it's never what you think it's going to be, like, this is the exact opposite. Like, I got the job and it was everything I wanted it to be. It was so good.
That's awesome. I mean, seriously. So what if we had to give like one final piece of advice for aspiring developers after you've gone through all of that? What would it be?
So much advice.
If you had to pick one.
If I had to pick one, I would pick be consistent in your learning. You never know what you pick up that's going to help you. I've was in interviews where I had just happened to pick up something obscure, like coding wise, and so somebody said a keyword and I immediately knew what that was, just because I happened to read an article on Hacker News, or because something came up and I happened to have this really obscure error message when I was debugging something, and go, I know exactly what that problem is because I ran into that. And I document all my problems. So when I run into an error, I spend 6 hours fixing it. I'm like, I'm not going to spend 6 hours again. So I write it down. And that's the first place I search is my own notes, So never stop learning, because you never know when it's going to pay off. But then also that's just part of the job. So you have to kind of love the process. You have to love the discipline and everything that comes with it in terms of like constantly learning and stuff. And so the earlier that you build that habit, the better. And I found that for me, I got the job and my entire learning roadmap reset. So all the stuff that I wanted to learn got put on the back burner because there are things that I never even would have thought to cover that are now more important, that got moved up in my learning, roadmap, because it's going to, like, learning that stuff will help me more in my day to day. So it's interesting how that perspective shifts and how quickly it happens. So never stop learning.
Okay. I think that's good advice. Well, Patrick, I appreciate you sharing this with us. I really do. It's time for our outros. If people wanted to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Oh, good question. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Patrick Shushiriba. So I think you'll link that in probably the notes or something. I think I'm on GitHub as P Shushiriba. Twitter, I think it's CPP Patrick for Cal Poly Pomona, even though that undergrad degree didn't do anything for me. And those are the big ones. I'm not a big person on Twitter. Like I don't really do anything, but I'm there. So LinkedIn or GitHub are the best ones. So
okay, that sounds good. Well, stick around for a couple minutes, but again, Patrick, thanks so much for coming on and sharing. I think this is going to be really valuable for people.
Great, thank you so much.
Everything we believe, we just see.